Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Parenting is Easy, Said No One Ever. I am your host, Chananya Abraham, and I am privileged today to share with you an amazing conversation that I just had with Dr. Josh Madsen, who is a pediatric chiropractor based in Iowa and has an amazing online presence as well. And I'm so glad that he has it because I think there's so many great things that we can learn from him. I'm going to share all of his links in our show notes, and I want to say that I'm so happy that we had a chance to speak to him, to be honest, both personally and professionally, because I really learned a lot. And there are so many great things that he talks about regarding what we can do at home and how we can help our kids retain information or even learn information if they're not getting things properly based on their posture, neck movement, eye movement, and what we can do at home. And the concept of always be curious and doesn't just apply to their test scores, but applies to their bodies as well. And we talk about different things that we can do at home to make sure that our kids are developmentally sound. So I hope you enjoy this awesome conversation with Dr. Madsen. Again, if you have any questions or concerns or critiques, or maybe on a guest or two, please reach out to us at parentingiseasypodcast@gmail.com, or you can follow us on social media. Please like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Enjoy this awesome episode. So, Dr. Josh, I want to get right into it here because there are so many things that I think are really important on this topic that I'm so glad we're talking about, because I know personally and also professionally, I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. And on this podcast, this is not something we've actually talked about before, but I want to get right into it regarding the fundamentals. And can you just enlighten us regarding good posture and how critical it is for our children's health and their overall development, and how is that also going to affect their physical and their cognitive growth?
So what a lot of people don't realize is like the curvatures, like the anterior to posterior curvatures, or the curves that come to the front, like our neck that comes forward and our low back that comes forward. Those curvatures are actually regulated by our midline cerebellum. So our cerebellum sits in the back of our head and it coordinates everything. There's studies now saying that the cerebellum has 80% of the neurons in the brain. So a lot of people don't realize that midline aspect of that cerebellum is really what creates those curvatures. So if we have decreasing curvatures in our low back and in our neck, or we have that anterior head posture, that means we have decreased cerebellar function and activity. Well, that midline cerebellum, that also fires into our frontal lobes, and it's simply put, all the muscles around our spine, they create what are called gamma oscillations that fire into our midline cerebellum, and that fires into our higher cortex. As our higher cortex gets activated, well, now that's where all of our cognitive centers are. That's where our speech development centers are, our learning centers are. So it comes down to a lot more than just posture and pain, and it actually comes down to brain development. And that midline aspect of our cerebellum actually develops in the first really months to year of life, as a kid's starting to raise their head, as a kid's starting to roll, as a kid's starting to learn to army crawl and crawl. And then it gets reinforced through time as a kid, starts playing in sports and starts getting stronger and stronger. And this is one big reason why I think it's important we're having this conversation, is because when a kid's, let's say they're playing on electronics all the time, their head posture is down and they're not moving. Movement is what stimulates our cerebellum. If they're sitting all day and not playing a video game or whatever and not moving, they're actually getting degeneration in their cerebellum. They're not activating it, so therefore it's not staying healthy. So the more kids move,
degeneration, what does that mean?
Means like those neurons are actively deconnecting or disconnecting. They're not actually being used. So when neurons fire together, they wire together. Well, the same thing is true as we can have negative plasticity, where if we don't use a system, it actually, our brain's like, well, we don't need this system anymore, so let's get rid of those neurons. So it's kind of amazing when a kid is playing video games all day, and that's when you start seeing this posture get worse and worse and worse. But that's really because their midline cerebellum just isn't able to develop and function because they're not using it. So, and that plays into every aspect of life, not only just their movement, but also their cognitive skills, their behavioral regulation, their attentional abilities. So that's why this topic comes down to a lot more than just good posture and pain.
Oh, for sure. So I just want to recap what you're saying and a little more layman's terms over here, as I'm trying to make sure that we're understanding this. So if we're not going to be having proper posture, then we're not going to have proper connection from the brain to the rest of our body and through our spinal cord. And therefore, developmentally and physically, we're not going to be able to be on par with the age development for whatever situation a child may be in from 1, 2, 3, up to 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. So if they're not going to be using the body properly, then we're not going to be able to grow properly. Is that a fair assessment for what you're saying?
Yeah, yep. And if you, kind of a side note on that is, if you look at every kid that maybe has severe attentional issues or maybe has autism or has behavioral dysregulation, if you look at how they walk and what their posture looks like, you're going to see a breakdown there. Their posture won't be developed like, a child that is really well developed, can focus really well, has good communication skills. Like once you start looking at it, you can't unsee it. So like, I mean, I can pick a kid out in the park that's going to have behavioral dysregulation simply because of their posture and how they move. They move more awkward. They don't move smoothly. Their posture is dysregulated. Maybe they're on their toes or maybe they're really slouched. So that posture is a really big key into a window into the brain.
Okay, so you got to talk about that more, because I think as parents, we would love to predict the future a lot. And I think when it comes to the way our kids are running in the playground or at home, or how they're going to be getting into bed and stuff, can really, it sounds like what you were saying, can predict what they're going to be like in school. Or maybe there are certain things in school where they're coming back and feeling frustrated about, but we can tell what's happened to them based on their posture. So as a parent, what can what can we look for regarding their posture, regarding their walk, or maybe how they're sitting, maybe how they're eating, that can really help us predict what is going on physically inside of them?
Yep. So the what you want to look for is in chiropractic, we learn it as just like a plumb line. So you want to see when they stand up straight from the side, their ear should be in line with their shoulders should be in line with their hips should be in line with basically their ankles. So a straight plumb line, you should have a straight line. Well, if they're really deviated, their head posture is way forward, that means they've lost their curvatures. They've lost their lumbar curve, so their low back curve they've lost their cervical curve, which that means their cerebellum midline cerebellum is not firing appropriately to give them that tone to bring their head back to a neutral posture. And then also you can look at, from the front, you can look at, do they have a head tilt? Do they have a shoulder that's higher, one shoulder that's higher than the other one? Do they have a hip? You feel the top of their hips, the crest of their hips. Do they have a hip that's a lot higher than another one? Well, that tells us those are lateral curvatures in the spine, and that tells us a lot about their balance centers. So when their balance centers are off, maybe one side's weaker than the other side, you'll start getting these lateral curvatures, or our vestibular system is off, which can play a lot into anxiety. It can play a lot into issues with busy places, because their vestibular system can't keep up, so they can have behavioral dysregulation in busy places. That's a side note. I don't want to keep going on that. But so there's a lot you can tell, but that's just a simple assessment. What does their posture look like? And then when it comes to movement, do they look smooth? Do they look coordinated? Do they look athletic? That's really the key. Is if they look athletic, that means we have a good cerebellum that can perform really complex movements and complex skills. If they can't, they can't balance well, they don't move smoothly. Maybe their stance is wider when they walk or move. That means they don't have good balance centers developed, so they have to have a wider gait to, accomplish that. So those all tell you about the cerebellum and how it's functioning.
Wow, amazing. And I think I never even thought about it. And I do have one of my kids for sure. I know her hips are a little bit slanted, and it goes in line with the fact that she has been professionally diagnosed with ADHD. And I never thought of that correlation. And it's amazing how there are so many things that the body, as we like to say here on this podcast, is the body keeps the score. And it really says so much regarding what's happening inside. So if a parent is seeing this, and I love the way you're talking about things being aligned, and there's a posture. And I know in meditation and yoga, they talk about having a center for everything. And that's something that could be really important to make sure we have a healthy balance.
Yep.
So what as parents can we do when we're starting to see those things? Obviously, going to professional can be very, very beneficial.
Yep.
And sometimes it's not going to be the situation. So what can we do at home that can really help a child when their posture is not what it's supposed to be?
So number one would be looking to what are called primitive reflexes. And if you go to my social media, I have tons of videos on this. But primitive reflexes are reflexes that should develop in the first year of life. And in a lot of cases, they don't develop appropriately. And then they have all this abnormal, think of the right words to say this, but abnormal connectivity of muscles and how they fire together, which can create a lot of postural issues. So for example, there's one called an asymmetrical tonic neck reflex. It's long name, but it should go away at 6 months of life. And it's simply, if you've ever seen an infant where they turn their head to the left and then their arm and leg flex on one side and the other side extends, that's called the fencer position. But that's a reflex that's meant to start connecting our eyes and our hands and start to create flexion on one side and extension on the other side to start to develop our muscle tone and our movement. But then around 6 months, that should go away so we can create a cross crawl pattern. So we can turn our head, extend our arm on the opposite side instead of flexing it. Well, if that reflex doesn't go away, every time I turn my head to the left, my shoulder and pec on the opposite side, my pectoralis muscles fire, which pulls my shoulders forward. And same thing over here, pulls my shoulders forward. So we start getting these shoulders that get pulled forward, and then we start getting a forward head posture with it. There's another one called a symmetrical tonic neck reflex that can do the same thing. So when I start seeing a lot of postural deviations, those are the first things that I look at. And then if they're there, those you have to get rid of them. You have to rehab those and get rid of them. You can do exercises for it a lot. There's a lot of good little books on exercises for primitive reflexes. Sometimes you can get rid of them at home. Sometimes you have to see a professional. That's kind of, we see people from all around the world to get rid of these reflexes really quickly. But that would be my first thing.
So I think for those of you that are not watching this, I just want to point out what Dr. Josh is sort of pointing out to us is as the head is moving, if there are other parts of the shoulders and chest that are moving, that could be a sign that there is something that developmentally and physically is not going well. And I think it's important for us to realize that it's not just, oh, well, they're growing. Well, they're growing, but in a way, probably that tree is not growing the way it's supposed to. And I think it's important to realize that, that's something to be curious about. We talk about a lot of the ABC of life, of always be curious. And it's not just about the emotional and mental, but obviously the physical is a really, really important part of this. And I'm so glad, Dr. Josh, that we're talking about this, because I think there are so many things that are correlated. We don't even realize are correlated. And specifically, I think 100%. The thing that, we talk a lot about in this podcast, and I talk about it in my practice as well, is gaming, and something that it really affects a child in so many ways. And we've talked about it socially. We've talked about it educationally, and how it can affect schooling and sleeping. And I think the area we haven't talked about, which I think is so important, and what I wanted to sort of get your guidance on, and I think we can all use the guidance from, is the effects physically on how gaming specifically is highly affected in the physical development of a child. And obviously the long-term effects, I think we can all see, and we've all read the studies. But I think in the short term and the here and now aspect of things is something I would like you to talk about, if you can, for a few minutes, just regarding the effects that gaming can have specifically on the posture of our kids.
So like, I always think of it as like, what's the opportunity cost of something, right? So like, for example, if they're playing video games for 4 hours a day, well, what are they missing out on? What's the other opportunity for development they're missing out on? And when they're playing all day, they're sitting stationary. They're only moving their eyes in a very small amount of space, which we need to be able to take in our entire environment for normal function, which if you're so think of it as you're training a system. Every time they're on that for 4 hours, you're training their brain to do something. You're training them to focus on a very small window, to move their eyes really quickly, a lot of times not even together. And what happens is every time they get, something good happens, they get a hit of dopamine. And so they pay attention for a short period of time, get a hit of dopamine. Pay attention for a short time, get a hit of dopamine, which trains them to pay attention for a short period of time in everyday life. So then we start seeing attention issues because those kids didn't train themselves to focus for long periods of time that are unrewarded, which is what attention is. So there's that aspect of it. But when it comes to posture, I think of it as, okay, if they're sitting all day, hunched over, they're actively not developing their cerebellum, where if they were outside playing for those 4 hours, now they're actively developing their brain, and they're developing more and more complex skills. They're learning to run faster, jump higher, do, balance better. So I think it's the opportunity cost of you're training them to have these skills that really that aren't beneficial for us in everyday life, versus those same 4 hours could be used to where they're actively developing their brain, because our brain really develops through movement in those first years of life. And the more and more we do of it, the better and better development our brain has, and the better capability it has long-term to learn and develop. And so really where I think it is the biggest benefit, I should say.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I'm so happy to hear you saying it. I don't think, and I want this very clear, I don't think both Dr. Josh or myself are saying that kids should be completely never having any sort of gaming, and they shouldn't have the opportunity to have that situation. There are situations, and there have been studies that shows, especially for ADD, that certain games can be beneficial, and sometimes having a certain social life online can be very beneficial for a child. So we're not saying, zero tolerance, get rid of it, and it's not something we should ever see again in our houses. But there's a opportunity for a healthy balance that I think sometimes as parents we need to be reminded of, that our kids need, and being able to grow in a way where their body is growing, and if by them sitting and being stagnant, there is an opportunity for growth that is not going to be there. So if they're going to have gaming, make sure they're doing things. Make sure they're part of a swim team, gymnastics team, playing basketball, doing things where they're able to make sure that there is a healthy balance in their body, so that developmentally things can grow properly. And I think the biggest thing I'm picking up so far is obviously education is key. And I think I'm learning a lot over here regarding making sure that physically the body is working properly and developing properly. What are some ways for parents that we can teach our children about the importance of good posture? And are there any resources or strategies that you would recommend as parents, helping our kids with that? I don't know if calisthenics is the right word. I don't know if it's the word that comes to mind, but there are things that we can sort of do with or for our kids to teach them that's this body movement.
I think it comes down to for example, let's say I'm sedentary, right? And I'm not moving and I'm not doing stuff. Well, now my son's sedentary and he's not moving and he's not doing stuff. So I honestly think it comes down to creating that example for your kids of what you want them to replicate, because kids they're going to replicate whatever they see. So I think it comes down to families being healthy together, right? Like the dad or mom has to move with the kid. They have to get out, they have to get playing, or get them in scenarios where they can become active. So I think that is a big thing. Even like me, if I'm lifting or I'm working out, my son, who's 3.5, literally comes over and tries to pick up weights with me, even though he probably shouldn't, but he replicates those things. And if I set that example consistently, the child is gonna see that, and they're gonna replicate that. So it's really hard for you to say, oh yeah, you should go out and play, and then the parent not or be sedentary. So that would be a big thing, is the more the parent becomes active, the more the kid will become active. And I think it's just creating a healthy environment in the home that is the most important thing, is at least what I would say is the most important thing, because there's not only that aspect of them all moving together. Well, there's also a social aspect. They get to talk with them. They get to play with them. They get to, have those types of scenarios as well. So, unplug the internet, and at night you say, hey, we're going to play for 2 hours before you go to bed, and stay away from, the videos and movies and TV shows and stuff like that, and build true connection, and you can incorporate movement into that.
I love that. And I think it's creating that balance and doing whatever works.
Yep.
Obviously there are studies that talk about making sure to be at least a half hour before bedtime, getting rid of screen time. And I like,
100%.
It's not just saying, okay, well, let's we're shutting off the internet, so now you have a half hour before you go to bed, do what you want. It's by modeling the behavior, where I think more importantly, when it comes to children, it's, all right, let's do this together. We talk a lot about behaviorally being in situations where, our kids might need our help cleaning up the mess they made. And not just like, well, you made this mess, so you clean it up. Well, okay, you made this mess, I'm going to help you clean it up because that's your responsibility, but I'm here to help you. And I think when it comes to screen time, it works the same way. It's about, okay, we're shutting it off. You know what? Mommy and daddy are also shutting it off. And therefore, let's do something together.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really important. So one of the things that I would like some more, I guess, clarity on is when we talk about this concept of calisthenics or maybe ergonomics. These are words that I'm familiar with just because of, I know the body movement and chiropractic work.
Yep.
I'm curious if you could talk about what they are and how we can maybe implement them if need be in situations, and specifically at home.
So what I tell parents is, especially if they're playing video games a lot or, doing different things like that, well, there's a lot of things you can add to that to make it better for them. Number one, you want them either sitting in an upright posture, TV up, so their head is up and their eyes are up. Just like on a computer, you want to be sitting up straight. You want to have a good curve in your low back, good curve in your neck, eyes up, arms at, 90 degrees. That's kind of the ideal posture. But what I actually like to add to it is saying, hey, if they are going to play video games, let's say they're going to play video games for an hour, Well, do it standing on a Bosu ball. Do it standing on a foam mat. Doing it standing on things that challenge their balance at the same time. Because again, when you challenge your balance, you're going to activate that cerebellum, which is going to create better tone. This is a big way that we actually rehab curvatures in the spine or lack of development of their core. Is we use a lot of balance activities to stimulate those areas of the brain. So that's something you can simply add in, and always making sure that their eyes are either level or up, because so many kids have a depressed posture because their head is always down. Well, then they just walk around with their head down all day, which is highly associated with depression. So if we can get them to be head up, looking up, having an upright posture in all activities, or as many as we can, then that's the most ideal scenario. And I just tell parents, if your kid's going to play video games, make it so they're actually moving or doing something that's going to be beneficial at the same time. So that's kind of my bargain.
I love that. I think where my mind went when you're talking about that, doctor, is that in the classroom, and there have been studies to show the kids' attentions are able to be better when they have a ball like that they're sitting on.
Right.
So let's talk about the education aspect of things and what you would like to see in the classroom more. But I think more specifically, what parents can do to sort of advocate for their child in the school system that can be beneficial for how they're going to learn and retain information.
Yep. So I once had a teacher. She worked for me for many years. She was a kindergarten teacher, and she got interested in primitive reflexes, and she was at a private school. And so she started incorporating a lot of the work that we do into her classroom, which was awesome. Wow. They were doing stuff for primitive reflexes. They were doing stuff for core stability. They were doing stuff for balance activities, balancing on one foot and doing numbers and letters. And so they were incorporating the body, which in those first, 8, 9, 10, 12 years of life, our brain is really developing through movement. So again, this is where that opportunity cost comes in of if they're sitting for 6 hours a day, that's not beneficial for their body or their brain. So incorporating as much movement, standing desks, or the exercise balls they sit on, so they're activating their core. I think that would be the most ideal scenario for a classroom, even though, yes, there's going to be a little more distractibility because kids are moving a little bit more, but overall, it's much, much better for their brain.
Oh, for sure. And I'm so happy you're saying that, because it is something that, we've tried incorporating. I know when we're studying for tests with our kids, to have them stand and switch feet as they're thinking about things. My wife still talks about it, even though it's been over 35 years, but she can still sing the song with all the states and their capitals. And it was based on her switching legs and just being able to have a certain memory, which is so amazing to hear. I'm sort of curious from what you've seen in your practice, how you've seen education be affected by the body, and how when parents start incorporating things regarding movement and how they're going to be sitting to retain information, how is that something that you've seen really affect based on posture and how a kid is going to be learning?
Yep. A side note on that is, if you talk to kindergarten teachers that have been in school for a really long time, what they used to do, almost like standardized physical assessments to see if the kid's basically body was ready to learn. They don't do that anymore. Can a kid skip? Can a kid, balance? Can they do with these things? Can they cross crawl? Those things were just standardized testing that they used to do, but they don't do it anymore, which I think is really interesting. Sorry, rephrase your question. I just blanked on it. I got it.
No worries. So what have you seen in your practice regarding how parents are able to see a difference, or how you've seen a difference in kids, that the way they're retaining information based on their balance and their overall movement?
Okay, so there's this comes back a lot to those primitive reflexes I was talking about. A lot of those reflexes, they affect how our eyes track and how they develop, especially across midline. So we have a reflex called an asymmetrical tonic neck reflex. Should go away at 6 months, helps us connect our right and left side of our body together. So a lot of kids have difficulty crossing midline, but they also have difficulty crossing midline with their eyes. So you'll literally see, if you have them track, you'll see skipping in their vision as they track, especially right around midline of their vision. And what that means is when they're going to go read a line, you're going to see, boom, this big jump. And that means they lost their spot. They have to re-find where it is. They have to, get back on track and read again. And so you start seeing a lot of learning delays just simply because a kid can't follow a line appropriately because they don't have those motor skills developed. So that's one big thing is once you get rid of that asymmetrical tonic neck reflex, usually the eyes will smooth out. Sometimes you have to retrain those. When you do, it improves their reading dramatically just simply because they now have a foundation in place to actually track those things. And there's another reflex called a symmetrical tonic neck reflex that plays into how our eyes converge and diverge. Well, a lot of kids can't converge their eyes. This is known as a convergence insufficiency. When they can't converge their eyes, well, now so it means like their eyes can't come in. So like if you bring something close to your eyes and go cross-eyed, that's convergence.
Okay.
And then when you bring your eyes out, that's divergence. So a lot of these kids can't converge their eyes, so they go to read and their eyes can't get all the way in, so they actually have blurred vision or double vision. And this gets missed so much by their eye doctor, and then I'll send them to a developmental eye doctor and it's caught like that, or I'll check it and find it gets caught really easy. But a lot of these kids can't sustain that convergence or bringing their eyes in and keep that there, so their eyes start to slip and then they start getting double vision and single vision, or sometimes kids literally have double vision, everything inside of like 3-4 feet, and it never gets caught. So if you're trying to read, it'd be like you're trying to read 2 different pages at the same time, and then you have eye tracking issues on top of it. Now you're really set up for failure. And these are basic skills that a lot of kids don't have, especially ones that are struggling with learning. And this is actually how my practice started. Was I started working with these kids, and then it's grown from there.
Wow, I'm so glad you're saying this, Dr. Josh, and everything you're saying resonates with me. As my teenage son was diagnosed, and one of the things was a tracking issue, and it wasn't picked up until we had him tested by a reading specialist, and she realized how much his head was moving, and realizing let's get his eyes checked, and having to go to a pediatric behavioral optometrist to be able to work out with that tracking. And there is, I don't remember what the exact number is, and maybe you could, refresh my memory, but when it comes to going back and tracking within a paragraph, there is a normalcy that is, I guess you could say, is not alarming when it comes to the amount of times we might go back and track. But what I do remember, the first time he did the testing, of his numbers being almost double of what the norm was, and him not being able to track properly, and through different exercises that we were given to work on at home, having specific lenses put in. One of the things we realized is him having horrible peripheral vision, and therefore having to work with that to make it that he's able to concentrate on what's in front of him. But because he couldn't see what was happening around him, he was making sure that he was getting everything. So he was going around, moving his eyes a lot and his head moving a lot because of that. And there's a very high correlation when it comes to the tracking issues with either an ADD or an ADHD diagnosis in a child. So I think there's a lot to be said. So I'm so glad you're saying this. What can parents, if you can pinpoint, look for specifically when they're looking at how a child is reading, or how they're viewing things around them? How can they pinpoint, or maybe certain things that they can look for to say, oh, maybe I should go see a professional about this. This is something that my child is not doing properly.
So what I simply do is I'll put a dot on my finger, and I'll make sure I'm at least 18 inches away from their eyes when I start this. Because if you're closer than that, it creates convergence to the eyes. So we don't want to do that yet. So we want to stay at least 18 inches away and just track side to side. Not fast, just like a nice, smooth back and forth. Any kid that's really over like 5 should be able to do that really smoothly. You shouldn't really see many starts or stops at all. If you're seeing a whole bunch of starts and stops as they track, those are called saccadic intrusions. We shouldn't see those at that age. So it should be able to smoothly track side to side without seeing any big skips or jumps. And same thing up and down. We should be able to see nice, smooth tracking up and down. If you start seeing a whole bunch of skips and jumps, that's lack of integration of those centers. Then I bring that dot right in nice and slow towards their nose, towards their eyes, and tell them to keep their eyes on it. We should see their eyes just come in nice and smooth together. We shouldn't see one side come in, another side not quite coming in or jumping around. We shouldn't see their eyes come in and then one just drifts off, which you see a lot, is their eyes will come in, and it just completely drifts off. And their eye, what happened, that's called visual suppression. Their brain literally shut off their eye, so they didn't get double vision. And that happens a lot. So looking at, can they track smoothly? Can they converge? That would be the top thing that I would do. And then from there, like we use in our office, we use a system called a right eye. So I can actually, it records their eye movements. So I can have them do a bunch of different eye movements and record it and standardize it for their age. But then I can also have them read a passage, and it tracks how their eyes move on the page. And so we can physically see, can they track appropriately, or is their eyes everywhere? But just starting by, can they do that? Track easily. And then what you were talking about, central peripheral integration of the eyes. So you can just have them look at a point on the wall ahead of them, and then you can bring in a pen on one side and go and just tell them, or have them tell you when they see it. They should be able to, if they have good peripheral vision, they should see, way out. They should be able to see, pretty peripherally. But if they're getting all the way closer to the front before they start to see it, they have central peripheral integration issues.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for saying that. And I guess a little bit of a personal question that I have over here based on this. I'm curious, is there any truth, maybe you could talk about, if a child is going to be looking cross-eyed too long, their eyes getting stuck in that position. Can you talk about that a little bit and where that even comes from in the first place?
I have no clue where it comes from. I've never seen a kid's eyes get stuck. So yeah.
Okay.
I don't think there's much truth to that at all. So
right.
Yeah.
I just hear kids talk about it all the time. I'm like, I don't know if that's true, but I think hearing it from a professional, hopefully, we can pass along that message.
Completely normal to be able to converge your eyes all the way and see 1 into about 3 inches in front of your face or in front of your nose. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, I don't think you'll
I'm
get
happy
stuck.
to hear that. So as you're talking about these different eye movements and stuff, I think something that I is a little more common nowadays is a child using VR, whether to play video games and converse with friends. Is that something that it could be beneficial, or is it maybe more harmful? And what type of maybe questions or precautions parents should have with a child using a VR system?
Ooh, that's a big question. To be honest, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if many people know the long-term effects of that yet, but I can't imagine that that's going to be awesome for the brain. Like, our brain's developed in a certain way for thousands and thousands of years, and our brain can adapt to a lot of stuff, which is fantastic and amazing, but that's a big adaptation. That's a completely different world that they're trying to adapt to. But then when they come out of that, so like, just think of, if I create efficiency in this other world, I create a really good brain for this other world. Is that going to translate into our everyday world? And I don't know the answer to that. It may be awesome. Maybe it's horrible. I don't know. And I think time will tell as that becomes more and more used, but I can't imagine that it's awesome. Yeah, if you've ever played a VR game, which I have once, and I'll never do it again, because it was I got dizzy. I got disorientated. Things were moving so fast, like in this video game thing. Like it wasn't anything consistent with what I would experience in my everyday life. And maybe that's a good thing. Your brain can really adapt to a lot of stuff. Maybe if I played that all the time, I'd become much more efficient in everyday life, or maybe do the opposite effect. I don't know.
Okay, so let me ask you, you have a 10-year-old son and he wants to play a video game on a friend's VR. Okay, I'm giving an example, right? Let's say you have a 10-year-old and
yeah,
they want to play a VR. As a professional with, I think, both the IQ and the acumen and the professionalism that you have in this specific area, what are you curious/cautious about?
Oh man. I definitely wouldn't have one in my own house, if that's what you're asking me. Like I wouldn't like, I won't let them play video games stuff like that in my own house. If they play it somewhere else, I would see what happens after it. Do they have the same behavioral regulation? Do they have the same balance? Do they have the same coordination? Do they have the same, or like, because what you hear a lot of times is, oh yeah, after they play video games, they can't regulate at all. They can't, they just can't adapt. So those would be the things that I'd worry about. I'd wonder about is, if my son went and played this, did it change his personality? Did it change relation ability? Did it change his attentional ability? Because again, if you're doing that all the time, you're training your brain to do something. And is that beneficial for the world that they live in? That's the biggest thing that I would take out of it. And if it's not beneficial, then I would say, hey, we're probably not going to do that very often. because I don't want to create plasticity in the brain for something that isn't going to be beneficial in everyday real life.
Wow. Okay. That's such a profound statement. And what's coming to mind for me is similar to the people that have started many of the social medias out there on how they restrict their kids' cell phone use or social media use. Hearing from a professional like yourself saying, well, I'm not going to have this in my house, resonates. And I think it's something that, I still work on as someone that works with a lot of teenagers, not wanting my kids, my two teenagers, to have any social media. And because I can see both the pros and the cons, but unfortunately, I think a lot of the cons come to my office. So just being conscious of that and wanting that, and I think hearing from you, it really resonates. And I'm so glad you said that. And for the record, everyone, he was not paid to say that whatsoever here on this podcast. But at the same time, just for us to realize that we're not here saying that it's bad or education or it cannot be learned through online and through VRs, and be very, very on top of our kids and making sure that they're getting what they can from it, but it's not hindering their growth in any way. And this has been absolutely such an amazing conversation, Dr. Josh. And there are so many things I want to sort of talk about more, but I'm curious, my last question for you right now as you sort of finish up over here, is there a specific story or client that you can think of that you have seen by you getting involved and by that early intervention from parents, how by parents being on top of the physical aspect of things, you've seen that child develop educationally, personally, and socially and mentally in a way that is really, really helpful to the changes that the parents have helped implement based on the work that you do with them? Is there a story that you can share with us?
Oh man, if you go to our social media, you'll see hundreds of them. There's so many, but I want to give you an example of a kid that I worked with a long time ago that was addicted to electronics, and what change happened when we didn't let him play anymore. So he was playing video games like 8 hours a day. So addicted. And the first thing I did was said, to break an addiction, you can't be like, oh yeah, play for an hour a day, because it's not going to happen. So we broke the addiction. We said, we're done. We just went cold turkey. He didn't play it anymore. But when did that ended up happening? So he was, he would have been considered like Asperger's at that time, or high functioning autism. What happened was he picked up a guitar, and at that time it was really hard because all of his friends were on video games. That's how he interacted with his friends, which is a way to interact. But again, what's the cost benefit, right? So we took that away. After a week, he didn't care anymore, and he picked up a guitar. He has perfect pitch. He can play any song by listening to it once. He is a genius when it comes to a guitar, and it's amazing. Like I follow him on social media now, and I listen to him. I'm like, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Like he'll replay all this stuff on Instagram, and it's awesome, truly awesome. But that would have happened if he would have continued to play video games. He would be in his parents' basement now, like forever. But instead, he picked up a guitar. He made friends there. He's in a band. He is crushing it, and he has perfect pitch. You can hear perfect tone, and is amazing at a skill that is going to serve him long term forever. And it's something he can do the rest of his life, and it's a skill set that isn't matched by many. So again, I think it comes down to making sure that we're putting kids in an environment that is going to be beneficial long term. And being in front of a video game hours and hours a day is definitely not that, from my opinion. But that's just my opinion.
100%. And thank you so much for saying that. I think we could use a lot more Charlie Puths and Justin Biebers out there that are, internet sensations and making them to be who they are. But I think the biggest thing I'm taking away from this story, and I hope this is something that parents realize, is that it takes a week. So if your child is in a place where they're so unhealthily involved with their electronics, it's going to take time. The consistency and making sure that you're giving them something else to do. Don't take it away and say, now you're on your own. It has to be replaced with something else. It's like telling someone that has a bad habit of biting their nails, well, stop biting your nails. Well, do something else instead. And it works the same way when it comes to their electronics. And if you're going to take away something that they're doing for 8 hours a day and then say, well, go outside and do something, that's not going to be enough. replace it with something, do something else, whether it's a swim team, gymnastics, a guitar, a drum set, which I know could be a little bit annoying sometimes, so put it in the basement, but making sure that they're doing something else and you're there to support what it is that they're doing. And I'm so happy you said that, and it's such an awesome story. And hopefully we'll see big stuff from this guy one day. But as we sort of finish up over here, and I'm so glad for your time and thank you so much for this. I'm curious if there is anything that we didn't talk about based on these amazing conversations that we had. Anything that you want to leave us with regarding this conversation that maybe us parents can know more about?
I would say that just the biggest thing from our side of stuff is, if your kid is struggling with learning or maybe behavioral regulation or, attentional abilities or any of those types of things, look at their motor development, because a lot of people don't realize that our brain develops through a huge aspect through motor development. And if they don't have those motor skills in place, all of those things become so much more challenging and so much harder. So that would be the big thing that I would recommend anyone that has a kid that has challenges, cognitive challenges, behavioral challenges, whatever it might be, is they have someone assess primitive reflexes, balance integration, eye tracking ability, because those things are so foundational just for normal brain development. So that would be my big kind of takeaway would be look at those things, have them assessed, and start rehabbing those things, because they truly make a massive difference in how that kid's functioning, and then therefore how their cognitive skills are, and also how their mentality is.
Yeah, I thank you so much for saying that. I could not have said it better myself. And I think, like we talk about here on this podcast, is, ABC your children. Always be curious around what they're doing, what's happening. And I think we can learn so much by just asking those questions. So I really appreciate that. Dr. Josh, even though we're going to be posting it in the show notes over here, can you give us a little bit of a connection towards you and share or tell us about where people can find more about you, how they could get in touch with you?
So Dr. Josh Madsen on Instagram, you'll find me there. On Facebook, it's Infinity Functional Neurology. We're in Iowa, born and raised in Iowa, and been practicing for about 8 years. And we got a great practice here, great team. And if you ever have any questions or need anything, we're always here to help.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'd like to finish over here with some rapid fire questions. And again, I can't thank you more for your time. It was absolutely amazing. This was a long time coming for anyone listening into this. It's been a couple of months since we tried making this work, but I'm so glad we did, because I think there was so much that I was able to learn from this. But I'm curious, Dr. Josh, to hear from you. Is there any, besides for your own videos and stuff, is there anyone either on social media or maybe a podcast or a book that you would recommend where people can get more information to be helpful at home for their children?
Yeah. Anything by Sally Goddard. Great book. Lots of it's over primitive reflexes. It's a lot of it's over like primitive reflexes and learning development. Really great stuff there. I really like her books. Let's see. Dr. Malilo's work is really great in the pediatric functional neurology world. Let's see. I'm trying to think of anything else there. Those are some really good resources, especially Sally Goddard stuff. Dr. Malilo has a lot of great books too that he's written. I'll be coming out with a book here in the next month over just primitive reflexes and development, just working on finishing up the rest of that, and it's almost done and ready to go on Amazon. So that'll be another great resource.
Amazing.
If your child has autism, Dr. Kyle Daigle, he wrote a book on autism that's really good, really informative, just gives you a lot of things to look at that you probably haven't heard or looked into. So those would be some good resources there.
That's awesome. Okay, thank you so much for that. And I'm curious, you mentioned having a 3-year-old child. If you can think of any babysitter from history, not a family member, and that's not alive today, that you would be comfortable to watch your child, who would that be and why?
Okay, so not a family member, and say it again.
Someone that's not alive.
Not alive. Ooh, that's a hard one. What do other people say? I don't even know.
Well, I don't like giving too much of a hint over here, but I think a lot of people like picking someone like Mr. Rogers, as or like some puppeteer, or let's say even someone like Gandhi. I've heard we heard a lot of Mother Teresa type thing, but I'm curious. What would yours be?
it would probably be an Orthodox saint like Saint Nectarios
Okay.
or Saint Paisios, who our son is named after. Yeah, so those would be
Okay.
my go-tos.
All right. As someone that you guys feel comfortable to be watching your child. So I'm curious.
Yes.
My last question for you. If you could think of an everyday mundane superpower that you would like to have as a dad that'll help out with parenting, what would that be?
Unlimited energy. We always say there's a lot of joyful exhaustion going on, but a little more energy would go a long ways. So
for sure. Yep. That is a great one. Thank you so much. Well, Dr. Josh, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for your time today.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.